The briefing will be on a report entitled Working to Reduce the Use of Secure Confinement, a review of King County's Children and Family Justice Center. And we believe that we are privileged to have Mr. Eric Trupin, who is professor and vice chairman of the University of Washington's School of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. And he's the director of that. So without further ado, I would like for Dr. Trupin to join us at the table. Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you, Council Member Gossett.
All right. And I want to indicate something to you first. All of us have received this report, and I know that some of us or our staff were on the committee with you in putting it together. And we are very much looking forward to hearing some of the highlights of the recommendations that you and your committee have made, because as council members, as legislators, we would have to look at laws and policies that currently exist or develop new ones that we think will be more effective at keeping young people out of our Children and Family Justice Center or out of detention-oriented confinement. And we have a pretty good, in my estimation, 13-year record of that, but we want to do a lot better. With that, the floor is now yours, Mr. Trooper.
Thank you, Council Member Gossett. Thank you, members of the committee. I've been privileged, and in some times not so privileged, to be the investigator and monitor for the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, looking at conditions where juveniles are being held in confinement. And I've been in places where children of the age of 11 are housed with 18-year-olds. I've been in places where young black women are locked in rooms, locked in cells for days and days, being deprived of any rights, being punished for small offenses. I'm privileged to be in King County, where we've made dramatic improvements on the conditions and the management of young people who have made mistakes, who have committed crimes which clearly they can have rehabilitation and move in a different direction. So when I was asked by Executive Constantine to do a review of what are our current status of our Children and Youth Family Justice Center, I was surprised by the courage that he had in asking for this review, because I have a strong bias that many, many youth who are now currently detained could be managed in a different way outside of detention. And in reality, in our country, black and brown children are often ensnared in a justice system where they're unable to move forward in progressive ways in their lives. So I was taken by the courage that he had in asking me to review. So the review I'm going to talk about responds to what we've done as a county in preparing the new Children and Family Justice Center, and my recommendations about how we might be able to improve on what the planning was. So let me
I want to ask you, what was the name of the committee that guided and worked with you on this effort?
It was the Children and Family Justice Center Committee. And let me say that this report is my report. Many members of the committee, it was a very diverse committee, and many members of that committee did not approve of some of the recommendations. They felt very strongly that we were going in the wrong direction in fact, building this building. And my recommendations are in response to what I think are the needs of the youth as well as the safety of the community. That, in fact, we do need a building. We do need services for young people. So let me be very clear that there were members of that committee who were not in support of the recommendations.
All right, thank you.
So let me first start out with some national juvenile justice statistics. And only 25% of youth who are being detained have actually committed violent crimes. Most of this represents what we have in King County, very similar statistics. Most of these young people have been in circumstances where something awful has happened. They've seen it or experienced it, that they have had traumas that have affected not only their behavior, but trauma, as we know from brain research, actually has an impact on the brain. And that undoing these experiences, or it creates irritability, it creates distractibility, it in fact sends a young person on a road where they are much more sensitive to a variety of things that end up in behavioral health, mental health, and educational problems. The consequences of being engaged in the justice system often is that they're going to maintain that engagement. So diversion, figuring out ways in which we can not have young people get involved in the juvenile justice system, really is it functions as a preventative kind of factor. The youth who are placed or adjudicated as adults or in adult facilities, in fact, have poorer outcomes, partly on the basis of they have records. And the consequences of having records and the records not sealed is they have a hard time getting education, they have a hard time getting housing, they have a hard time getting jobs. So
those are these mostly youth in King County who are declined upon because of the seriousness of their crime.
I will come to that, Councilmember Gossett, and what we're doing.
Right.
So the idea behind the thinking here is that let's move in the direction where we have a less correctional kind of facility. This is our current, this is a photograph of our current facility, and we wanted to limit the secure confinement to those youth who pose a significant risk to the community, and we want to manage youth in the most natural environments that they possibly can. That was the thinking, that is the national perspective. When you look at good outcomes, kids who in fact are not going to continue on a course of crime, these are the kinds of settings that they are in. As I indicated, the committee perspectives, it was difficult to even get people to be on this committee because of strong biases around we're looking for zero detention. That's the goal of our county. So many people say, well, how could we going for zero detention at the same time investing in a building that's very expensive? So, and again, as I said, my bias is that we need a facility, and there are some youth, in fact, have to be in a secure placement. The perspectives of the committee, and it is represented by my report, that the more stakeholder, the more community involvement in this process, the better outcome, and that the more we have community approaches that mesh with the policies and strategies that are affected, the more likely we're going to improve the reduction of children and youth in the justice system. So the detention makeup. We've made lots of progress here in the King County. We should be very proud of the progress we made. Obviously, we need to move forward, but we've reduced almost 50% from 2005 to 2014. There's been a 20% decrease in the last 2 years. However, the population continues to be disproportionate minority. 50% of the young people are black, 19% are Hispanic youth. Hispanic youth are rising in terms of the number of youth. Racial disproportionality, most parts of the country are not making progress. We're making some progress in that. We've almost had a 10% decrease. So keep that in mind in my recommendations that we are moving in the right direction in terms of the county.
This is for black youth, not necessarily for Latino youth.
Correct. And there are many, many factors that contribute to that.
Right.
We've got a lot of efforts here in the county that are really focused on diverting kids and intervening. You know, we've got, unique Best Starts for Kids, which is a real creative strategy for prevention and early intervention, diverting kids from the cradle to prison pipeline. We've done changes in intake criteria at the detention center. There have been a whole host of strategies around how you deal with warrants. There's been the prosecutor's office has developed a variety of strategies, peacemaking circles, where youth are being able to kind of problem solve and kind of address their conflicts and address their mistakes and crimes in a different way. And we have alternatives now for kids who've committed or engaged in domestic violence that are showing great promise in terms of diverting kids from the juvenile justice system. The assumptions made about building this facility. In 2013, the county hired experts at Washington State University to come up with a proposal of how many beds do we need. And the assumptions that they based their proposal on, there would be no changes in existing parameters for juvenile offense levels. There'd be no changes in existing juvenile justice sentencing grid, no changes in juvenile detention criteria. There will be no changes in auto decline statutes. There'll be no changes in Becca bill funding, no changes in human services funding, and there'll be no changes to treatment programs to juveniles. And almost every one, and these were the assumptions they used, almost every one of them, we've made changes in King County. We've had an impact on each and every one, or we're attempting to have it. So the assumptions that built the bed prediction was based on this, and we have a very different circumstance in our county. So as part of my recommendations here, on the left side of this slide is the proposal that we would have 7 secure 16-bed units that would equal 112 youth, 2 Becca units of 6 beds each, and a total of 124 beds. This was a reduction from the original proposal. The county executive reduced this number, a total number of beds of 156. The 2 blue units on the bottom would be units that would be available for some alternatives. When I looked at the average daily census, what we could do, and even bringing the population of youth from the adult facility, it was clear from my perspective that we could do with a total number of secure beds of 92, that there would be a significant benefit in taking 2 of those units and using them for the tremendous needs that we have in our community for kids who are homeless, for kids who could, in fact, we could expand programs like FERS and other programs and use those facilities in a very effective way rather than detaining youth who, in fact, were at a lower level of security. There would be real benefits and community involvement in staging and designing those units. So rather than having 124 beds, that would be, we're proposing 92 beds.
And where would the other 30 beds would be more for intervention programs, but where would these beds be located?
They're right next, the beds on below, in the blue, they're right in the facility.
They are there.
Yeah, they're part of the they're part of the footprint of the facility.
All right.
There's no change there would be a change in that they would be softer. They would not be as secure. They could be used by community programs for a whole variety of reasons. And again, we have a tremendous homeless problem with kids in this community, and we've demonstrated that doing something with children and youth who have engaged in domestic violence, and there would be possibly other kinds of programs that would benefit from alternatives.
All right.
Do I have to go quick here, Councilmember Gossett? How am I doing?
You have to go quick. You're
okay.
correct.
So
what's JJDPA mean?
Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act, federal law that sort of requires states to engage in certain kinds of activities that they're obligated to do. This has not passed out of Congress, but the direction that we're going is very much aligned. We're going to deinstitutionalize, not place status offenders, children who have not engaged in violent crime in a detention facility. We're going to put kids, children, youth in juvenile facilities. We're engaged in a variety of things and emphasize that in effect, the juvenile justice population is black and brown, and we need to do something about that. Our program recommendations that allow us, you can't just look at the reduction of number of beds. There's a strategy involved here in order to get to a fewer number of beds. We eliminate the admission of status offenders. We limit admission to youth who have committed serious and violent offenses. You could see the strategy that was the premise for our prediction in terms of size. We want to expand, my recommendations are expand funding of family interventions programs, offer wraparound and value services, increase crisis stabilization services. Just so you know that the majority of youth, there are about the same number of youth who have committed nonviolent crimes are similar to the youth who are in the facility. In fact, that there are only between 25 and 26% of the youth on any given day are youth who have committed violent felonies, either against a person or against property. So the population of our detention center, although we've reduced it dramatically, still made up of half of the youth who have not committed violent crimes or have not committed a felony. So, again, I have a whole host of recommendations. One I think is essential and important is that we have young people who are tried as adults at the Mailing Regional Justice Center. Yeah. They spend between 21 and 23 hours in their cells. Their isolation lasts up to several months. And many of them are awaiting trial, and most of these young people are black and brown. These children,
your understanding is that they're kept in their cell all day?
That's correct. That's correct. They're and have limited educational programs. We've had a recommendation from the Racial Equity Steering Committee that the executive formed to move these children to the juvenile facility where they're much more appropriately managed and there's much more likelihood for rehabilitation. This ensnares, keeping them in an adult setting without training for the staff really exacerbates any problem that they have. I fear it's a real violation of their civil rights.
I mean, the thing that surprised me most about that is that usually we reserve spending 23 hours a day, up to 23 hours a day, in the adult jail for those who have committed serious offenses while in jail and they have to be taken to the hole. You're saying that most of these juveniles that are out in our regional justice center are in their cells 20?
Many of them are.
Okay.
Yeah. And the amount of programming that exists is minimal. The services, the educational services, the mental health services are not commensurate with the needs of these young people. With any hope that they're going to return to the community and be more effective citizens, this is really not doing them any good. This is in fact making things worse. So today's population in terms of the census is not the future, and King County is making progress and making significant progress. We shouldn't build a facility based on prior thinking about what the size of the population is. We have a workforce that would really benefit and could be more skillfully trained. We have lots and lots of strategies that have demonstrated that they're evidence-based and can really improve outcomes in terms of the management of these youth as well as back in the community, decreasing the likelihood that they're going to be on the cradle to prison pipeline. We have a whole host of programs and strategies that could really improve outcomes for kids. We have community mentors and programs who align and engage effectively with these young people. We need to invest in having more opportunities for mentors and various community providers to move in and work more effectively with these young people. We need to improve the opportunities in education. We need to expand the community participation and expand mentoring and counseling, a whole host of things. These are all part of a very, very long, extensive report in terms of recommendations. My final comment is that I think we're moving in the right direction. Our county doesn't do vision without action as a daydream. We have to have action. That action without a vision is, in fact, a nightmare. And I think we have a vision here in this county to improve outcomes for young people. Let's take advantage of it.
Thank you, Dr. Trupin. Particularly at the end, this vision is something I think that all members of the King County Council and the other leaders of our government would agree with. The challenge is putting into practice based on best practices that have been observed around the country, putting that into practice here in Martin Luther King Jr. County. So to begin the questioning of you, what do you think are the main barriers to putting into practice many of the more controversial things that you have proposed? For instance, what is the main challenge to not letting any Becca youth be housed in our detention center?
I think that some of the recommendations are not recommendations that clearly the county executive or the council, they are recommendations that have to engage other stakeholders, the judges, the prosecutors. So I think that there has to be a consensus around these issues.
Before we can.
Yeah, I think the other aspect of this is I think that the juvenile justice system, or certainly the detention program, is housed in an adult-oriented system, and I think it needs to be removed, just like we've done at the state level.
Yeah.
Removed our child welfare and juvenile system and moved it into an early childhood learning system. We need to move our juvenile justice system either into some other department, public health, or some other entity that has more of a child and adolescent focus.
Orientation. Okay, thank you. Now I'd like to open it up for members of the committee. We're happy that we're joined by Councilmember Dombrowski, who's not on the committee, but very interested in the subject matter that we're covering. But I'm going to call on Councilmember Lambert first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm really glad to hear that you're acknowledging the auto declines is a unanimous consent of everybody that they come back.
Yeah.
And I think that was a really good decision everybody made. But I do think that we need to keep the numbers separate, because auto declines are...
Keep the people separate?
No, the numbers separate. So we keep track of how many children are in detention. As you see, that our average has been about 51, down to 30-something. So we keep that number, and then we keep our auto declines, so we can add them up. But I think it's really important that we keep those two numbers separate, because at some point people will forget that these were auto declines that we didn't have to put over here. And so I think that that's going to be very important. We keep those two numbers separate. And I think there's some good talk about keeping them, being able to intertwine some of them back into the system, depending upon where they are. You know, we tried, Councilmember Dombrowski and I tried to do a FERS full out and super FERS. And we did try, and we got turned down.
Yeah, I think congratulations for doing it, because I think we in fact not only can improve outcomes, but from a fiscal perspective as well, we would be using our resources more effectively. It has an economic effect size as well as a positive community impact.
So I'll speak for me, but I think at the time we felt the same. And it was very disappointing that we wanted super FERS and nobody would help us. And so we ended up with, what are we calling it now? FERS Lite. FERS Lite. So that's good. We have FERS Lite. And in the first year, we've had a 60% reduction in juvenile arrests.
Right.
But in FERS, super FERS, we had other categories
Exactly.
that were to be brought in. And we were told, no, we could not do that. So
I put your recommendations in my report.
thank you. Thank you. Did you put it was Councilmember Lambert and Councilmember Dombrowski? So the next time we come up with-
We don't.
I'll-
You guys, we don't need to
Just
do
do it.
that.
Yeah, that's
Shall
exactly right.
I call the county executive and tell them where I got
No,
that
she
from?
was just kidding.
So the other two things that we're having some problems with is that DSHS at the state level is not taking the children. After 13, you cannot find a placement for them. So we have kids that are in there. They're in there because there is no other safe place for them to be.
Yeah.
And it breaks my heart. But as I've talked to some of these kids, they've said, I have no better place to be because nobody's taking care of me. And I'm worried about X or Y gang. So
Yeah.
that's a problem. And I don't know, if we could open a separate pod or wing for those kids, or maybe they already are, I don't know. But
No.
I think the DSHS in many categories is not stepping up to the plate. And then because we all care so much, we say, oh, state, county will do it for you because we care so much about the kids, and we do. So we do the state's job.
Well, the new secretary of this new department has...
Is it Ross?
Yeah, has gotten an interest in juvenile justice populations. And so I'm optimistic that we might have a different perspective. In my recommendation, there would be 4 16-bed units that we could use for the expanded FERS and for a variety of other things, and still have enough, from my perspective, still have enough secure beds to house those youth who needed to be in a secure facility.
Well, I would like to talk to you at some point offline about what my idea of super FERS was.
Great.
And see if we can get closer
Yeah.
to super FERS.
Again, like so many of these issues, getting the prosecutor and the judges and everyone together around that with a strategic program would make it happen, as I'm telling you what you know, which is your business. So
We can help in that. I want to get other people involved. Councilmember Cole Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Dr. Trupin. I cannot believe that it's been over 20 years since I voted no against the Becca bill in the legislature, and one of the main reasons was to lock up kids, basically, in what we called secure CRCs, especially for kids, like you mentioned in your report, kids who are traumatized, have been traumatized, and kids running away who perhaps did so or do so because of physical and or sexual abuse at home. Kids truant from school, there could be a lot of reasons for that. And when I visited, along with Councilmember Dembowski, the youth detention facility last spring, I was very disappointed to see that there were kids there locked up who are status offenders or had been, yet the main information that I received was they were ones like Councilmember Lambert mentioned, who DSHS could not locate a proper place for them, but they're still locked up. And even though they were together, and your image shows what the facility looks like, they were right across the way from kids who were there for other reasons. And I'm hopeful that if we do have the new Children Family Justice Center, and I've understood there is this, a different place for them, but I think this is a hugely important
Absolutely.
issue. Recognizing some kids are violent, apparently even with the status offenders, some refuse services. There could be a lot of reasons, but not to include them in the same facility. I'm kind of on a soapbox about this, and you've mentioned this, but I'd like to hear more information from you about your recommendations for this particular group.
I think that I don't simplify that some young people are engaging in behaviors out in the community that are really dangerous. And figuring out some way to prevent that from happening is really a responsibility of, certainly it's a responsibility of families, but if family is not there to do it, we need to be helpful. Detaining them, looking at outcomes is not something that brings about a significant positive outcome. Figuring out some other kind of wraparound, some other types of approaches for this, rather than saying you're going to be, your rights are going to be taken away and you're being put in a secure jail.
To protect you.
To protect you. Could we not come up, and again, there is research that supports alternatives to this improve outcomes for this population. And, intensely getting involved. People often talk about the difficulty of engaging with families. Well, it's our responsibility to figure out ways to be more effective with families rather than taking this on as a government responsibility. Let's figure out ways to engage more strategically, more effectively families. And I'm not just saying this because I'm a believer in this. There's research. I do it myself, where there's evidence to say that some things really do bring about improved outcomes for these families, and we don't invest enough in it.
But hopefully with the best starts for kids.
I think it's it's incredibly
implemented.
important to move us in that direction. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Other members or visitors at the committee, would you like to ask any questions or make any comments?
I would when your committee members are.
He wants
Go ahead.
you. Okay. Go ahead, Councilmember Dombowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to start by thanking you for having this hearing today. In my recollection, this is the first county council hearing on this issue since we approved the contract to build the facility a couple of years ago. I think obviously a lot has transpired since then related to it. You'll recall and may have read, I don't know, but then Councilmember Harrell at the City of Seattle and I wrote an op-ed in January this year saying that maybe we ought to take another look at the project up there and see if we couldn't improve it. I was proud before I came on the council to campaign for it. I went and got it endorsed. I believe in the fundamental goals of it, and that was twofold, really, in my mind. First, to have a unified family court with 5 stories and 15 courtrooms. Councilmember Lambert's been a strong advocate for that. Fortunately, we didn't get the land use for that. We're at 3 stories and smaller, and that really is about treating our families in crisis, right? In a place where all the services can be delivered in a comprehensive way to improve outcomes and reduce the trauma. And I'm frustrated on the courthouse side, and I think the court is here too, that we're not getting that, and I hope to someday we will. And the other piece is the detention side, and we have just learned so much since this concept was first, derived more than a decade ago, really, with the studies that were done about the science around detention of young people. And if you read any of the Annie Casey Foundation reports, and we're blessed to have Dr. Trupin here, one of the nation's leading experts, when there's cases around the country, when Congress needs help, I mean, this is the guy and his teammates that they call. And all of the evidence, and your report shows, Dr. Trupin, is that the facility that was derived over a decade ago for detention isn't the best we can do.
Right.
Right? And I think it's important that we acknowledge that. One of the problems we have in government is the practical realities of trying to get something built. And yet I acknowledge you can't keep redesigning. And with respect to Dr. Trupin's report, I encourage my colleagues, Councilmember Goss and I have introduced legislation which would implement it, and we're working with the executive branch on the practicalities of that. But you, I think, Dr. Trupin, kept a pretty practical approach with respect to the construction realities.
That's
Maybe you
right.
want to talk just briefly about
No,
that.
I think that there was a plan. When we started this, I would have liked to have been asked a long time ago to this, but, the bulldozers were there. So my recommendations were trying to understanding what the footprint was in terms of design. Could we do something that would continue to move us in a progressive direction around lowering the number of youth who go into secured detention, knowing the consequences of that are often deleterious to their future. So that was the kind of the vision that and always keeping in mind that the majority of the young people who end up in these facilities are black and brown. So how do we address that issue as well? And are there strategies that already exist that we would be a better investment in than having more beds? We're going to need some number of beds, but could we not be more strategic about using that facility for other purposes that the community has a desperate need for?
I want to also, if I might, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
After
But we
that,
only have about 5 to
Oh,
7 more minutes for
it's
this
written.
topic, but go ahead.
you know, the county executive and the mayor at the time also came out with statements, and I want to say that we wouldn't have had this report and this great work without, frankly, the courage of the county executive to say, let's take a look and see if we can do better.
Yeah.
And he gave carte blanche to Dr. Trupin to go and do this work, which he did with a lot of community folks, and I don't think there was unanimity in terms of around the
Yeah,
table.
Far from
and he's already told us
But he
that.
represents the best that
Yeah.
he could
Yeah.
get forward. And I really want to thank you, Dr. Trupin, but also recognize the opening that the county executive offered to bring this work forward, because I don't think we're, as general government folks, equipped to do it. We're not, but
Yeah.
we are good at listening to experts, I think, and working with our colleagues to improve things. And we have a commitment here in this government to do the very best, implement best practice. We're a nation leader, and I think we should seize the opportunity here that's been presented to the extent we can to do it. And you know, look who's in this room. We have the presiding judge here. It's a credit to her. We have more than one judge from Superior Court here. We have the prosecuting attorney here. We have the public defender here. I mean, we have the head of the new juvenile division, Mr. Hung, is here. We have community members here. We have several representatives of the executive branch here. The government as a whole obviously really cares about this project, and we need it. I think it can be improved. I think we should take and seize this opportunity. Don't sleep through the change that's occurred. And I don't, you know, it's not the perfect solution, right? You wouldn't design the facility today if we asked you to, as it is, I suppose.
That's
But
right.
this is a recommendation. There's some strong ones in here for facility improvements, but also, Mr. Chair, organizational improvements, right? Which will take some time and how we do things. And that's part of our continual improvement process here. But there's a number of recommendations in the report that I really like, and I hope we can work on those. And I just encourage folks to take a look at the legislation and seize the moment to, within the practical realities of what we are dealing with, with permitting and building and finances, which seem to be shifting all the time on this project, do the best we can. That's my goal on this.
And I think that, Councilman Dombrowski, that you will find unanimity with your vision and goal from the majority of us as fellow legislators here in King County. And we're all excited about, and we'll take a good critical look at Dr. Trupin's recommendation. And he's done, before you were able to join us, a very good job at laying out visually the kinds of recommendations that he has made. And he himself said, I know we won't be able to do all of them right away, and a lot of them don't have that much support. But I think that you'll find that most of us would concur with what you just said about our goal.
Council member, I'm sorry.
He wants to say something. I want to let the committee members talk, and then you can close us out, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Dr. Trupin, for doing the work you have and bringing the analysis to us in this report. And as Councilmember Dombrowski has said, one of the original goals for the Children and Family Justice Center is a unified family court. But a lot of our conversation here today has been about detention and detention beds. And I think it's really important to make sure that we emphasize, as part of this conversation here today and the Family Justice Center as a whole, is the other space in the facility that is essential to addressing first of all, the number of youth in detention and the disproportionality of the youth that are in detention. Because to just have fewer beds means you have fewer beds. We need to make sure that we have fewer kids and we address the disproportionality. And the center, as proposed, does take aim at that by making sure that we have education spaces for education, for behavioral health, for counseling, for job training, that is otherwise lacking right now. And that's the benefit of those are additions that this brings to us that we don't otherwise have today.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that in a context of a conversation that has centered largely around detention, we emphasize what this building and facility will bring us that we don't have now to bring that number down and to address disproportionality, keep people from having repeated contacts with the justice system.
Councilmember McDermott, I couldn't agree with you more that the number of beds can only be looked at in terms of what we can do to divert youth in a variety of ways from coming into that facility, and that having strategies that are programmatic, that are community-based, that allow for diversion alternatives, thinking this through, doing everything from being involved with the educational system, the child welfare system, behavioral system is essential to that. So it is, I completely agree. This is not just, to think about this report in terms of let's just reduce beds. That's not the way I was thinking about this, that this is a complicated and it's intertwined with other strategies that are essential for us to do, and that we are making major strides. And there are many, many positive things prior to my doing this report that were being planned for and that we're doing in the county, where I think we're doing a terrific job knowing what goes on around the country. My recommendations are to make it better.
Okay. We have two other very important reports on our agenda this afternoon, but I wanted to ask Councilmember Dunn, was there anything that he wanted to say before we move? Okay. Okay, yes. Jenny Cole-Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Trupin, I want to commend you for providing recommendations included in the report. I was especially taken by the expand community participation in youth reentry. And if you'll indulge me for a moment, I saw this in action. Last May, I visited Israel and the West Bank with the Center for Women and Democracy. Yep. And while there, when we went into the West Bank, one of the sites we visited in Bethlehem was one of the refugee camps where a lot of kids have lived their whole lives there. And there are walls and there's barbed wire, and many people can go out and work, but they have to return. And the one that we visited, there was a cultural center that was established to help kids with their environment and to be inspired and to seek improving their lives. And they offered workshops in the arts, dance, the media, sports, education. And many of the kids who got involved with that are now traveling the world and have been to the United States even. And it's just a remarkable program, and I think we need to do more like that here.
I think there are fabulous community members who bring life experience, who have a sense of community and culture and history, who we just don't take advantage of for a variety of reasons, a variety of biases that we have, or they can't get involved with our youth because they may in fact have records and have had things in their background. But we have opportunities that we don't take advantage of that could really have an impact in giving some of these young people a sense of belonging and being part of something. So I couldn't agree with you more.
Good. And the one that I observed and had conversations with the people involved was through the Middle East Children's Alliance. And I agree, the more we can do, the better.
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
All right. Thank you to Dr. Trupin. Thank you, members. I'd like for you to know through informal conversations, collectively and sometimes individually, we will be following up with you on these set of recommendations that you and your advisory group have put forth. And we definitely will keep you involved and look forward to doing that, sir.
I've had some very good conversations with the executive staff about some of the going forward with some of the recommendations. So that I'm very pleased about that as well.
That's good to hear. Okay, thank you.